All right, well, we are in 1 Samuel and going through this section, and that was a great transition to the message tonight, because we're going to be talking about our image of God, the image of God that we have in our mind. Now, you're not supposed to make an image. It's one of the 10 commandments, one of God's top 10. In fact, number 1, do not make any graven images. Or number 1, have no other gods before you. But 2, don't make any image. But we all have images in our mind of who God is, and we put God in a box. And we're going to read a chapter or 2 of the strangest and most depressing chapters in the Bible. Not maybe the most, but some of the most depressing chapters in the Bible, where the people of God get the wrong image of God. The people of God get the wrong image of God, and it leads to some tough times. So let's pick it up where we left off a little bit last week in 1 Samuel 3:19. So Samuel grew, and the Lord was with him, and let none of his words fall to the ground. And all Israel from Dan to Beersheba knew that Samuel had been established as a prophet of the Lord. Then the Lord appeared again in Shiloh, but the Lord revealed himself to Samuel in Shiloh by the word of the Lord, and the word of Samuel came to all Israel. Samuel's this young guy. He has a call on his life. He has this Nazirite vow that he's not supposed to drink any wine, and he has this Nazirite vow, and so all his life he's got this vow, and so he's dedicated to the Lord at about age 12. Pastor Dave talked about last week and how he hears the voice of the Lord for the first time. And he hears the voice of the Lord, and the prep school, the prophets that he talked about last week, he learns that, you know what? He hears the voice of the Lord, and he's got to speak it no matter what the consequence. And Eli gives him that warning. Tell me what you heard, and if you don't, the consequences will be on you. This little 12-year-old just speaks it out and says, this is what I heard. And it was judgment on Eli and his 2 sons. Because Eli was a guy that he was the priest, he was a judge over Israel, but he wanted so much to be liked by his kids that he let them kind of do whatever they wanted. He knew that they were sinning, that they were actually leading women into adultery in the temple, or not the temple, but in the presence of God. They were desecrating God and God's implements. And here, Eli, because he wanted to be liked, because he wanted to be a buddy, just continued to kind of let his kids do that. And that was the challenge, too, that Pastor Dave's been talking about. If you want to be liked by your kids and you let that influence your parenting, you probably won't like how your kids turn out. Because you're so focused on trying to be their buddy that you don't be a dad. When I was first became a foster parent, I was in my late 20s, and I was a youth pastor, and so I decided we'd take some teenagers as foster kids, because there's a huge need. And so our first foster son, he came to us at 12 years old. He was about 5'9", 200 pounds. I really looked up to him, and here he is, and he was like many foster kids, he'd been held back. He was a 200-pound 6th grader, okay? And he was 2 years behind, and this guy, he'd been through a lot. And I had been a youth pastor, and so I knew how to handle kids. I knew how to handle teenagers. So we brought him in, and I look at this guy, and he's bigger than some of my high school students. And so I'm thinking that, I just I'd be like the youth pastor to him, but he lives in our house. But he needed a dad. You know what happened? It didn't go well. Because I was trying to be the youth pastor, the guide, and the friend, and, he needed a dad that was going to say no. And we did say no, but the problem was sometimes it was too late. Now, it's never too late if we totally repent. And actually, this prophecy, this prophetic word that Eli has given, he's given several years. We don't know exactly how long, but he's given several years to get things right. But he doesn't. And as a result, there's going to be a consequence. And there's always a consequence. When we hear the word of the Lord and we don't obey, we often don't hear the word of the Lord again, because he's waiting for us to obey. He gives us just enough word, just enough revelation, just enough insight to show us the next step. Your word is a lamp to my feet, a light to my path. He's not a spotlight that shines clear to the darkness to show us where we're going to go. It's just enough light to show us our next step, and we got to take that next step, and then he'll give us the next step. But too often we don't take the first step. So, here we go. Continuing in verse 1 there, 1 Samuel 4. Now Israel went out to battle against the Philistines and encamped beside Ebenezer, and the Philistines encamped in Aphek. Then the Philistines put themselves in battle array against Israel, and when they joined battle, Israel was defeated by the Philistines, who killed about 4,000 men of the army in the field. And when the people had come into the camp, the elders of Israel said, "Why has the Lord defeated us today before the Philistines? Let us bring the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord from Shiloh to us, that when it comes among us, it may save us from the hand of our enemies." So the people sent to Shiloh that they might bring from there the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord of hosts, who dwells between the cherubim. And the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were there with the Ark of the Covenant of God. Okay, so what happens? They've been at war with the Philistines. And you have to understand, the Philistines are the long-term enemies of Israel. You know how long-term we're talking? 3,000 years long-term. Philistine, the Latin version of Philistine is Palestine. Who are the Israelites still warring with, in a sense? They're warring with the Palestinians. Where is the land of Philistia? It's the Gaza Strip. This is a battle that's been going on for 3,000 years. 3,000 years, and still unresolved. So there's a battle, and the Philistines line up on one side, the Israelites on another, and they're like, okay, we're God's people, so we can do this. We can do this. We can go against the Philistines. And so they do. They go against the Philistines, and they get handed to them. And it's 4,000 men of Israel die. 4,000 guys die. So they're thinking, okay, it says, in the text it says that Israel was defeated by the Philistines. But they say, notice what they say, "Why has the Lord defeated us today?" Interesting. They take it and they personalize it. We lost, and so the Lord must be against us. Here's their image of God. Their view of God, their picture of God is influencing how they see themselves. The Lord is against us. The Lord has defeated us. So the leaders say, hey, we got an idea. Why don't we get the ark? Why don't we get the ark? And if we take the ark, well, we'll win. Why has the Lord defeated us? Let us bring the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord from Shiloh to us, that when it comes among us, it may save us from the hand of our enemies. Okay, so we didn't win. The Lord is against us. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go get this special magical box called the Ark of the Covenant. Now, you've probably seen it. If you saw Indiana Jones, you saw something that really doesn't look like it, but it's close. Here's a picture. The Ark of the Covenant. It was this gold box. It was about 2 feet, a little over 2 feet high, a little bit over 2 feet in depth, and about 3 feet long, just a little bit over 3 feet long. And it was covered with gold. And the top of it had this it was actually considered a whole other piece, was what was called the mercy seat. And there were 2 angels staring down at their feet, their wings covering their eyes, and in the middle there, between the wings, is where it was called the mercy seat, and that's where God met them. That's where they would sprinkle the blood. That's where God the sins would be atoned for. It's when God spoke, he spoke from there, between the wings of the mercy seat. And so here they're thinking, the Ark of the Covenant, this represents God. This is God. In fact, Numbers 10:35 says, so it was, this is before they were going out to conquer the land. So it was whenever the ark set out that Moses said, "Rise up, O Lord, let your enemies be scattered, and let those who hate you flee before you." And when it rested, he said, "Return, O Lord, to the many thousands of Israel." They remembered that verse. They remembered that verse from the Torah, and they knew the Ark of the Covenant. In fact, the Ark of the Covenant was so sacred that when they did anything with the ark, when they pulled it out, only certain Levites could carry the ark. And as they carried it, you weren't supposed to look at it, and they were supposed to leave 1,000 yards away before they could get. That's the closest they could get, was 1,000 yards when the ark was open. In fact, it was never even open, just like you saw. It was when they traveled, they traveled with it covered. But 1,000 yards. 1,000 yards. That's a long ways. That's 2/3 of a mile. Okay, so they're walking this far away from the ark. They don't want to get any closer because they know that's the presence of God. They're told not to look at the ark because if they looked at the ark, they could be struck dead. This was serious. And they're thinking, this is a serious weapon. If people look at the ark, they could die. Let's take the ark out and we'll just kind of unleash the ark and they'll wipe out our enemies. It's a good idea. It's a God idea. Not all good ideas are God ideas. God, in fact, says he's not going to have anything to do with this. God doesn't like to be called an it, first of all. Verse 3, it says, let us bring the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord from Shiloh to us, that when it comes among us, it may save us. God is not an it. So often, even people talk about the Spirit of God, and do you have it? The Spirit of God is not an it. The Spirit of God is a him. Do you have him? Do you have God inside you? This box, this ark, they'd had their focus on this box. And that this box not just represented God, but to them it was a God. It was something they worshiped. You see, one of the 10 Commandments was that you not have any idols, not have any pictures, not have any images of God, because as soon as we have an image of God, we try to stuff God into that image. We try to stuff God into the box. So the God of Israel was supposed to be supposedly in this box called the Ark of the Covenant, this box. But he wasn't in the box. Does anybody know what was in the box? Okay, Aaron's rod that budded. The law, the 10 Commandments, the stone commandments of the 10, God's top 10, and a little jar of manna. Okay, those are the only things that are in the ark. And that's it. They're just supposed to be in there, a reminder of their wandering in the wilderness. God was not in the box. God was, when he came, he met them between the angels. He met them and spoke between the angels, but he was not in the box. But they thought he was in the box. We have a tendency to put God in our boxes. You know, there's this box over here that somebody thankfully left for me. And this box, I think, represents a lot of how people look at God. This is the box that represents God. God is love, right? So the love box. God fits in my love box, and love. So we got this love that represents God. And so God is a God of love, and I know that he's a God of love because he fits in my box. And I've got a box, and the reason we have boxes, in my garage, I have lots of boxes. And why do I have boxes? Because the boxes keep things in order. And I want to keep God in order. Because I've got to keep control of God, because he's a big God. And I don't like the idea of him doing things that I don't like, so I just kind of put things in order. You know, you have to have a place for everything and everything in its place. And so if you put God in the box, then you can kind of control him. That's what we do. So I've got the God is love box, but they also have the God is patient. And patience is golden. Now, I like God's love a lot more, so my love box is bigger than my patience box, because I know that God's patience will eventually run out, because God's a lot like me. Yeah, you should be laughing. That's not true. But we make God in our image. God has made us in his image. We don't make God in our image. But that's what happens is the longer we walk this life, unless we constantly keep coming back to the Word of God, we tend to fashion God that looks like us. So, yeah, we should be loving. And yeah, we've got patience. But you know what? Yes, God is also just. And I like the fact that just. That means the people that did me wrong are going to get justice. But I'm glad that he's more patient than he is just, especially with me, right? So God is patient, yes. He's patient and he's just. And there's one more box. What box is this? Mercy would be good. And of course, there's fruits of the Spirit, and the fruit of the Spirit and all those things that represent God's character and so forth. But this box is a little box because I don't think that's really a big part of God. This is the wrath of God. It's this big. And I like to keep it in this little box. In fact, the pretty picture on the top is because, you know, I have warm and fuzzy thoughts about the wrath of God coming on ungodly sinners that have done me wrong. But not God's wrath coming on me, because I'm a child of God and I'll never experience the wrath of God or the judgment of God. And in fact, I like to keep the wrath of God kind of just hidden away. I don't want to think about the wrath of God too much. We put God in those boxes. Now the question is this really represent God? No, not at all. Well, yes, God is love, and God is patient, and God is just, and God has wrath, the wrath of God. We don't think of that as one of his characters, but there's a judgment of God that he hates sin, and he hates ungodliness, and he hates those things because it pulls people away from God, and it hurts people. And so the wrath of God, how big is that? About 2 years ago, a close friend of mine was getting caught up in this thing called hyper grace. And hyper grace basically says that God loves you so much that do whatever you want, and he doesn't care. He really doesn't care. And just the more you understand that freedom, that you can go do whatever you want, then the less you'll do the things that are wrong. But even if you do, it's no big deal because God is love. And God's got this big box called love. And the wrath of God, where'd my wrath go? Oh, there it is. The wrath of God, yeah, that's Old Testament. We don't need the wrath of God anymore. But isn't God the same yesterday, today, and forever? And so he was sharing this with me and this whole vision that he'd had and how this paradigm shift and how he really was finally understanding grace and finally understanding the love of God and really kind of just leaving the Bible behind because the Bible wasn't important anymore. And as I read the Bible, I happened to be going through the Old Testament at that time, and I'm like seeing the wrath of God. I'm seeing the wrath of God. I'm seeing God that's upset, and I'm seeing a God that's angry, and I'm seeing a God that punishes sin. And then I get to the New Testament, and I see God of grace, but I also see God that's upset at Ananias and Sapphira and striking them dead because of hypocrisy. I see Jesus. Well, he's loving. Jesus is totally loving. He never got mad at anybody. I don't know what Bible you're reading. Jesus was upset with the Pharisees. You brood of vipers, you whitewashed tombs, screaming at them. Jesus didn't scream at anybody. Oh yeah, that's right. When he tossed over the tables, he did it like this. No, he had righteous anger and cleared the temple because they didn't realize their sin. They were in their sin and entrenched in their sin and so blind to their sin that they couldn't see it. And so he had to get angry and rise up and throw these things away. The anger and the righteousness and the wrath of God. And we see it. And as I was reading through the Bible again, I was seeing, yes, the Old Testament has a God of grace and a God of judgment. And the New Testament has a God of grace and a God of judgment, but it's now a perspective that I can look through and I can understand it. My boxes didn't work. Most people, they want that God, the God of the Old Testament, God of the New Testament, and I'm so glad for the New Testament. No, it's the same God. It's just as he's revealing himself, he's showing his holiness and his righteousness, and he's showing that in the New Testament here, what happened is the wrath of God is poured out on his Son, Jesus, and that he suffered for our sin. But there's still wrath that is going to come. There's still consequences for our sin. If I love my dad, but I know that he hates it when I squeal the tires, pulling out of the driveway, and I keep doing it, am I building a relationship with him? No, I'm frustrating him. Now, God is not going to get frustrated in the same way, but he can get angry. And so often we think, well, God is so loving. He doesn't, I know my sin's wrong, but I really like it. And we don't say it that way, but we think that way. I know my sin's wrong, and I need to fix that someday. That's what we say. I need to fix that someday. But God is loving. He'll forgive me. Wow, really? Yeah, he will. Well, God's a God of love, and he forgives us, and by grace we're saved. And well, if you really believe that, and if you really believe in his forgiveness, and you really believe in his power, then step out in faith and receive the blessings and the promises to walk in the power to do what he asks you to do. I said the other day, you're good Christians, and you would just cringe if I started ripping out pages of the Bible. And yet that's what many Christians do. Well, I don't really want to obey that one. Not right now, okay? Whoosh. I don't really want to obey that. No, that one's just too hard. It's not convenient. It's not convenient. It's just easier to live together. Rip that out. Oh, this one it says having no other idol. Oh, this one it says do not be filled with wine. But I just need to relax a little bit. I'm not gonna do that one. Ouch. We put God in a box. And maybe it was like, well, God's love, we sing about God's love. We sing about it today. We sing about it, love like an ocean. And it is. But you know what? Your picture of God with love like an ocean is still too small. Even when you have that picture, even when you have that image, you have an idol because it's still too small for God. The Israelites, when they made that golden calf, they were saying that our God is strong and he's vibrant and he's going to He's going to bring forth lots. But God said, no. And thousands of people died that day because they put a God in a box. They put God in a box. Now, maybe you're not the type, well, I don't really put God in a box, but you have your boxes that you check off. Here's what it is. I want to be a good Christian, so I got to read my Bible. So I read my Bible, and I do my time. I got to read my 4 chapters a day so I can get through the Bible in a year. And then I got to pray so long so that I feel good. And then I got to go to church once a week, twice a week, 3 times if I'm really spiritual. And then I go through this list and check. And the result is I got boxes. And those boxes, once again, are all about me checking off so that I don't have to have a relationship with God. What does a box do? It organizes things, but it also puts walls around things. That's what boxes do. I got walls here. And so every time I put God in a box, or every time I got a check box, I've got a wall instead of the intimacy that God desires to just have a relationship. At one point, I was recognizing with my wife that I needed to do more. I needed to spend more time. I needed to say more things. And so in my, type A personality, I was like, okay, I made a list. Tell her I love her. Do these things. I made these boxes. Now, mistake, telling her that I had a list. Don't do that. Just do the right things. But going through, I had this list because I was working on this list, and it's like, I got to do these things. No, she just wants to know that I love her because I love her, as opposed to he's checking it off his list. How often with our relationship with God are we just checking it off our list? And God's like, really? Really? You love me this much? Oh, thank you. You checked me off. You checked me off today. Thank you. No. It's about letting God out of the box. He's not in the box anyway. So, they say, the Lord has defeated us. We need the box. Verse 4, so the people sent to Shiloh that they might bring from there the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord of hosts, who dwells between the cherubim. And the 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were there with the Ark of the Covenant. So they go to Shiloh, they've got the Ark, and Phinehas and Hophni are there, and they're like, this is a good idea. We need to beat the Philistines. The Ark of God, the presence is with us. We're going to make God come. He defeated us the first time, but we're going to make him come. Does that sound good? We're going to make God come with us? I don't think that's a good idea. That's like saying, when Joshua encountered that angel of the Lord, he said, whose side are you on, ours or theirs? And he says, neither. Oh. I got to be on your side. It's not that the Lord's on our side, it's that we need to be on his side. And they weren't getting it. And so they thought they had this good idea that if they bring God along for the party, it's going to be great. Verse 5, and when the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord came into the camp, all Israel shouted so loudly that the earth shook. Wow, this must be an exciting church. The earth shook. Everybody's excited. God must be there. There's a lot of churches where there's a lot of excitement, a lot of good stuff happening, or so we think. And the earth shakes, and man, you could feel the Spirit was there today, and it's just like, whoa. And so I'm just like, wow, God is in that church. God's left. God wasn't there at all. We were looking on the outside, and we were judging by our boxes, and it's like, if the music's good, God must be there. If they got good singers, God must be there. If it's, one of the things that people judge it by, is it loud enough? Then God must be there. The young people judge it if it's loud enough, God must be there. The old people judge it if it's too loud, they're not sensitive to the Spirit, and so God must not be there. Okay? Both are boxes. Both are boxes. And you know what? God can be there when there's no music. But we have a box that says, well, unless there's music and unless I feel good after worship, then God really wasn't there. And you have a verse for that, right? Second hesitations. There's no verse that says you have to feel good for God to be there. But so often that's what we're looking for. We're looking to feel good. And if I feel good, then God was there. The party's going on. Israel is shouting, and the earth shakes. Verse 6, now when the Philistines heard the noise of the shout, they said, what does the sound of this great shout in the camp of the Hebrews mean? Then they understood that the ark of the Lord had come into the camp. So the Philistines were afraid, for they said, God has come into the camp. And they said, woe to us, for such thing has never happened before. Woe to us, who will deliver us from the hand of these mighty gods? These are the gods who struck the Egyptians with all the plagues in the wilderness. It's working. Israel is seeing the panic in the other camp. The Philistines, the panic's coming on. They're like, yes, God is with us. God is doing it. God's doing it. The enemy's getting ready to flee. The enemy is fearing God, but they don't have faith. Verse 9, the Philistines say to themselves, be strong and conduct yourselves like men, you Philistines, that you do not become servants of the Hebrews as they have been to you. Conduct yourselves like men and fight. So you can see William Wallace standing up and saying, freedom. And he's saying to them, rally, I know you're scared, but right now, if you don't fight, you're going to become a slave. And so they're like, you're right. And they work it up and they're ready. And they got their weapons, and they're ready to go. Verse 10, so the Philistines fought, and Israel was defeated, and every man fled to his tent. Read that home to mama. There was a very great slaughter, and there fell of Israel 30,000 foot soldiers. Also the ark of God was captured, and two of sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, died. Wow. God was against them. They lost 4,000. They take God in because it's a good idea. It's a God idea. We'll bring God along for the party. Now they lost 30,000. Oh, and they lost the ark. Oh, and the two priests die. Wow. But wait, that doesn't fit my box, because Israel is God's chosen people, and so why would he allow God's chosen people to lose? And why would he allow the Ark of the Covenant, which is like this most sacred thing in all of Israel, to go into the hands of the enemy? Why would God do that? Doesn't he realize, God, don't you, no, we got to rewrite the script here. That's not going to be good. In fact, it doesn't going to show you glory because you're so strong and powerful. If you let the enemy get the ark, then people are going to think that you're not very powerful. And so, God, you don't know what you're doing here. God, let's rewrite the script here. Come on, let's do this. And so we think that God's messing up because God is not fitting in our box. We've got these boxes that this is how it has to happen. In order for it to be done right, it's got to happen this way. No. God says that he's going to be honored as holy. Verse 12. Then a man of Benjamin ran from the battle line that same day and came to Shiloh with his clothes torn and dirt on his head, which is just simply saying he's mourning. Now when he came, there was Eli sitting on a seat by the wayside watching, for his heart trembled for the ark of God. And when the man came into the city and told it, all the city cried out. When Eli heard the noise of the outcry, he said, what does the sound of this tumult mean? And the man came quickly and told Eli. Eli was 98 years old, and his eyes were so dim that he could not see. Eli here is on the outskirts of town. He's watching. The ark went, and he's kind of nail-biting. He's white-knuckling it because the ark is not supposed to go to battle. Okay? That's not what the ark is for. The ark is the mercy seat. The ark is that place where God meets them and gives forgiveness of sins, not beats up on the people that you don't like. And so he's white-knuckling it, realizing that, no, I don't know if this is a good thing. And he's watching. It says that he's watching, which is weird because he's blind. He's 98 years old. They didn't have cataract surgery. They didn't have all these things, so he couldn't see. And so he's watching. And honestly, unfortunately, that's how many of our spiritual guides are. They're blind guides. They're watching. They're standing watching. They can't see a thing, but you can't tell that they can't see. And so they're looking, but they can't see because they don't have spiritual insight. So many people, you know, that book, Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus, John Gray. He's been divorced like 6 times. He's got all the wisdom in the world, right? And so we take wisdom from these people that are blind guides, thinking that they'll help us with our relationships or they'll help us with our spiritual walk. We need to make sure that the people that we're seeking counsel from are seeing God, that are hearing from God, that are Samuel's, not Eli's. So, verse 16, then the man said to Eli, I am he who came from the battle, and I fled today from the battle line. And he said, what happened, my son? So the messenger answered and said, Israel has fled before the Philistines, and there has been a great slaughter among the people. Also, your 2 sons, Hophni and Phinehas, are dead, and the ark of God has been captured. Then it happened when he had made mention of the ark of God that Eli fell off the seat backward by the side of the gate, and his neck was broken, and he died, for the man was old and heavy, and he judged Israel 40 years. Eli wants to know what's happening. He hears that his 2 sons have died. But when he hears that the ark has been captured, that's just too much for him. And he's sitting on the seat, and he's overweight. And he's sitting on the fence, and he basically, as he hears that, he's overwhelmed by it and basically falls over backwards. Here's a man that didn't have any backbone, and as a result, he breaks his back. That's how God takes him out, breaking his neck and breaking his back. And he judged Israel 40 years. Just as the prophecy that God had given Samuel is fulfilled, both sons dying and Eli dies on that same day. Now, verse 19, his daughter-in-law, Phinehas' wife, was with child due to be delivered, and when she heard the news that the ark of God was captured, that her father-in-law and her husband were dead, she bowed herself and gave birth, for her labor pains came upon her. All right, so Eli's daughter-in-law is married to Phinehas. She's pregnant. When she hears the news, she's obviously close to term, and she's overwhelmed. She bows down, and of course, in that day, it was often they would just kind of squat and do the pregnant delivery thing. And so she's bowing down, and she bears the child. And verse 20, and about that time of her death, so she's going to die in this childbirth, the woman who stood by her said, "Do not fear, for you have borne a son." But she did not answer, nor did she regard it. Then she named the child Ichabod, saying, "The glory has departed from Israel, because the ark of God has been captured, and because of her father-in-law and her husband." And she said, "The glory has departed from Israel, for the ark of God has been captured." Ichabod, that's what it means, the glory departed. So the ark represents the glory. Her husband's dead, her brother-in-law's dead, her father-in-law's dead. Whew. Wow, what a day. What a day. And in a sense, how awful for the people of Israel. God wasn't fitting in their boxes anymore. It's like, God, where's your justice? God, where's your love? You love the people. This wrath thing, maybe these colors should be backwards. It seems like you're pretty upset, God. And they thought because of God's love and because we were chosen people, that God's just going to do whatever we want him to. Because, I mean, he cares for his name's sake, and he's got to do it his way. Well, this ark, this box, continues to bring problems. Chapter 5, verse 1. Then the Philistines took the ark of God and brought it from Ebenezer to Ashdod. When the Philistines took the ark of God, they brought it into the house of Dagon and set it by Dagon. And when the people of Ashdod arose early in the morning, there was Dagon fallen on its face to the earth before the ark of the Lord. So they took Dagon and set it in its place again. Okay, stop there. So the Philistines, they capture the ark. They know that the ark is this is the thing of Israel. This is Israel's pride and joy. This is their main thing of worship. Represents their God. So they take it and they're like, okay, so what are we going to do with this thing? Oh, you know what? We'll put it in one of our God's temples. Gods need to be in a temple, so we're going to put it in the temple of Dagon. Dagon was a kind of a fish god, later on a grain god, but basically he had the body, the head and torso of a man, and the lower extremities were a fish. So think of a male mermaid, which would be a merman. Okay, that's kind of what he was. All right, so you got a merman, and here he is, and what's happened is they bring the ark in, and the next morning Dagon is tipped over. And they're like, well, that's kind of strange. So they put Dagon back up. They have to help their God up and say, okay, put it back in place. Verse 4, and when they rose early the next morning, there was Dagon fallen on its face to the ground before the ark of the Lord. The head of Dagon and both the palms of its hands were broken off on the threshold. Only Dagon's torso was left of it. Therefore, neither the priests of Dagon nor any who come into Dagon's house tread on the threshold of Dagon and Ashdod to this day. So Dagon falls over, his head is cut off, his hands are cut off, they roll off to the side by the threshold of the door. And they walk in and they're like, "Ooh, Dagon." Sorry. That was a little fishy. Okay, anyway. So the head of Dagon is on the threshold and they're like, whoa. So they put Dagon back, and they see the ark, and then they have this whole thing. Well, because the head of Dagon had rolled under the threshold, the priests never step on the threshold. You know those people that never step on a crack? Well, they have this tradition now that they're not going to step on the threshold as they enter. And it's, you see everybody walking into their church. It's the Philistine version of a genuflect. So anyway, sorry for you Catholics out there. Anyway, so Verse 8, verse 6, but the hand of the Lord was heavy on the people of Ashdod, and he ravaged them and struck them with tumors, both Ashdod and its territory. And of course, some of your old King James say hemorrhoids. That's what the tumor was, okay? So he really spanked him. And when, verse 7, and when the men of Ashdod saw how it was, they said, the Ark of God of Israel must not remain with us, for his hand is harsh toward us and Dagon our God. Therefore they sent and gathered to themselves all the lords of the Philistines and said, what shall we do with the Ark of the God of Israel? So they're like, okay, this is not working out for us. This ark that we thought was going to be a prize, we don't want it anymore. Here, you take this ark. Okay, what are we going to do with this ark? Because we've got these tumors, and it's making it hard to sit for this. So verse 6, but the hand of the Lord was heavy on the people of Ashdod. He ravaged them. Verse 7, and when the men of Ashdod saw how it was, the Ark of God must not remain with us. Verse 8, therefore they sent and gathered to themselves all the lords of the Philistines, what shall we do? And they answered, let the Ark of the God of Israel be carried away to Gath. So they carried the Ark of God of Israel away. So here they are in one city, in Ashdod. They say, you know what, let's just send it over to Gath. Okay, this is a kind of sister city here in Gaza. So it was, after they had carried it away, that the hand of the Lord was against that city with a very great destruction, and he struck the men of the city, both small and great, with tumors, broke out on them. Therefore they sent the Ark of God to Ekron. So it was, as the Ark of God came to Ekron, that the Ekronites cried out, saying, they brought the Ark of God of Israel to us to kill us and our people. So they sent and gathered together all the lords of the Philistines and said, send away the Ark of God of Israel and let it go back to its own place so that it does not kill us and our people. For there was a deadly destruction throughout all the city. The hand of God was very heavy there. And the men who did not die were stricken with tumors, and the cry of the city went up to heaven. Basically, the ark, it keeps getting passed along from city to city. They're trying to figure out what to do with it. Each city, they started getting these tumors on their body. As well, in the last city, there's some kind of a plague. And it appears that it's some kind of, they think the plague's related to mice. But there's a disease, and people are dying from this disease. They're like, okay, this God of the Israelites is no God to be messed with. So they thought that they could put the box that represented God in there, just appropriate it. I'm just going to add God to my other gods. A lot of people do that. A lot of cultures do that. They add Christianity to their other whatever they have. And of course, in Muslim countries, there's this thing called Chrislam, where Christ, you can believe in Jesus and you can also believe in Muhammad. And you're kind of marrying the two religions. And we know that from the book of Revelation, that's adultery. And yet, here even in the United States, we do that, where we bring Christ in and we put Christ alongside of our other religions, our other stuff, our other heritage, our other background. Well, it's just the way we are. This is what we do. And it's not that big a deal. And we're trying to marry Christ with the world, or marry Christ with a prostitute. So chapter 6. Now, the Ark of the Lord was in the country of the Philistines 7 months. And the Philistines called the priests and the diviners, saying, what shall we do with the Ark of the Lord? Tell us how we should send it to its place. So they said, if you send away the Ark of God of Israel, do not send it empty, but by all means return it to him with a trespass offering. Then you will be healed, and it will be known to you why his hand is not removed from you. Okay, God's upset with you. You need to send an offering. Okay, that was the big thing. You got to send some kind of offering. Well, what do you offer the God of the universe that has everything? Verse 4, then they said, what is it, this trespass offering which we shall return to him? And they answered, 5 golden tumors and 5 golden rats. And yeah, it's like, how do you fashion a golden tumor? What's a golden tumor look like? But they figured it out somehow. According to the number of the lords of the Philistines, for the same plague was on all of you and on your lords. Therefore you shall make images of your tumors and images of your rats that ravage the land, and you shall give glory to the God of Israel. Perhaps he will lighten his hand from you and your gods and from your land. So they're recognizing what Israel's thinking, that if the ark gets captured, God would be defamed. No, what's happening is God's bringing repentance to the Philistines. They're recognizing this God is not fit in our box. Does not fit in the boxes that we've thought about him. He's too powerful for us. We don't know what to do. Now, unfortunately, they didn't come to faith that we know of, but God was bringing them to the point of humbling themselves, and so that, prayerfully, maybe some of them did turn and turn to Israel. Verse 6, why then do you harden your hearts as the Egyptians and Pharaoh hardened their hearts when he did mighty things among them? Did they not let the people go that they might depart? Now here basically what's happening is the diviners are saying, you got to do this. And they're like, I don't know if I want to do this. I don't think we want to do this. And they're hardening their heart, and they're saying, remember the Pharaoh? Remember what happened to him when he hardened his heart? And they're beginning to think, yeah, we heard about that. Yeah, we don't want to be sunk like he was. So, verse 8. Then they take the ark of the Lord. Oh, verse 7. Therefore, make a new cart, take 2 milk cows which have never been yoked, and hitch the cows to the cart, and take their calves home away from them. Then take the ark of the Lord and set it on the cart, and put the articles of gold which you are returning to him as a trespass offering in a chest by its side, then send it away and let it go. And watch, if it goes up to the road, to its own territory, to Beth Shemesh, then he has done us this great evil. But if not, then we shall know that it is not his hand that has struck us, but happened to us by chance. Okay, so saying it happened by chance doesn't make any sense. But just in case, here's what we're going to do. We're going to tie these 2 milk cows, which don't bear a yoke, okay? And they've never had a yoke, and they've got calves, and so they're not going to wander on their own. But he says, tie them to the yoke, put a cart, send the ark back, put a little trespass offering here with the gold on the side, and if it goes to Israel, then you know it was the God of heaven, the God of Israelites that did this. If it doesn't, then it wasn't that God. So, of course, what happens? The men did so, verse 10. They took 2 milk cows, hitched them to the cart, shut up their calves at home, and they set the ark of the Lord on the cart and the chest with the gold rats and the images of their tumors. Then the cows headed straight for the road to Beth Shemesh and went along the highway, lowing as they went, and did not turn aside to the right hand or the left. And the lords of the Philistines went after them to the border of Beth Shemesh. Now the people of Beth Shemesh were reaping their wheat harvest in the valley, and they lifted their eyes and saw the ark and rejoiced to see it. So the ark, it just basically goes home. They say, you know what? Let these animals carry it home if it's supposed to go. And that's what happens. The ark is going home. It's going home. The cows are taking it. They know the way to go, and they move along. Verse 13. I did the cow jokes last time, so I won't go further. Verse 13. Now the people were reaping, and they saw it and rejoiced. Verse 14. Then the cart came into the field of Joshua of Beth Shemesh and stood there. A large stone was there, so they split the wood of the cart and offered the cows as a burnt offering to the Lord. Then the Levites took down the ark of the Lord and the chest that was with it, in which were the articles of gold, and put them on the large stone. Then the men of Beth Shemesh offered a burnt offerings and made sacrifices to the Lord the same day to the Lord. So when the 5 lords of the Philistines had seen it, they returned to Ekron the same day. Okay, so this comes in, the people of Beth Shemesh, the Israelites see it, they're like, wow, God brought the ark back, party. So they celebrate, they take the cows, they offer them a burnt offering to the Lord, and they have the Levites come and take the ark because they know they're not supposed to touch the ark. Celebration, okay? But, verse 17. These are the gold tumors which the Philistines returned as a trespass offering to the Lord, one for Ashdod, one for Gaza, one for Ashkelon, one for Gath, and one for Ekron. The golden rats, according to the number of all the cities of the 5 Philistines belonging to the 5 lords, both fortified cities and country villages, even as far as the large stone of Abel, on which they set the ark of the Lord, which stone remains to this day in the field of Joshua of Beth Shemesh. Verse 19, then he struck the men of Beth Shemesh because they had looked into the ark of the Lord. He struck 50,070 men of the people, and the people lamented because the Lord had struck the people with the great slaughter. God, but wait, we just got the ark back. And 50,000 people died because they looked in the ark? I mean, not just, you think, well, you're not supposed to look in the ark, but we just got it back from the Philistines, and maybe the Philistines tampered with the law. And we got to check to make sure that they didn't tamper with the law, or they didn't touch that rod that Aaron, the rod of Aaron that budded, or that little jar of the manna. We got to check it out. And so that's what they do. 50,000, they look inside the ark just to make sure that everything's there. And God says, no. No, you shouldn't have done that. Now, it seems like a good idea because, well, the ark was just in enemy territory. We got to look out for God. We got to take care of God. Now, when I say it that way, it's like, well, obviously that's stupid. But it makes sense. From their perspective, the ark just came back. We should look in and just make sure that it's there. Make sure that it's safe. And God says, no, you're not to look inside the ark. You're not to look directly at God and think that you'll live. Even Moses couldn't look directly at God. Verse 20, and the men of Beth Shemesh said, who is able to stand before this holy Lord God, and to whom shall it go from us? So they sent messengers to the inhabitants of Kiriath Jearim, saying, the Philistines have brought back the ark of the Lord. Come down and take it up with you. Here, come get this thing. We don't want to touch it. God is just. God is patient. God is loving. But he's also a God of wrath. And our boxes, they don't work. We try to put God and we try to fit him into these boxes, and we try to think that, well, God understands. Whenever you say, let me just warn you, whenever you say God understands, you're in trouble. Whenever you say, God understands what I'm going through. Well, sure, certainly, Jesus understands our trials, and Jesus understands our travail. But when you say God understands, so I can do this, so I can sin. God understands so I can sin. God does not understand sin. You put God in a box. And because God's in a box, it's safe for you. I've got the little black box of wrath. I got it in there. I don't have to worry about it. And God says, no, that's not how I am. I don't fit in your box. I'm not a box to be checked off, nor am I a box to be fit into, to be squashed into. What boxes do you have that you're trying to fit God into? What ways has your image or your view of God been affected by the world that you live in? Even as we were talking about earlier about people that are having tests coming, and I'm not very good at tests. And so I just ask God to help me. That's a great prayer. But if you go into that test thinking of the past, if you go into that trial thinking of who you were in the past, you're forgetting who God is. If you're thinking of that you can continue just kind of in your compromise and in your sin, and it's just not a big deal, you're forgetting who God is. You put him in a box. But it's an okay box, right? It's okay. It's okay to have God in a little bit box. Just so I can understand him. That's just it. You can't understand him. Ephesians 3:20. Now to him who is able to do exceedingly abundantly beyond all that we ask or imagine or think. In other words, he can do so much more. He's so much bigger, so much more than anything we can imagine. There's a great line in Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and talking about Aslan. And Aslan is this lion, and which is representing Jesus. And of course, the big question is, they ask, well, is he safe? Well, of course he's not safe. But wait a second, I thought this lion was on our side. No, you're not. It's not the lion's on your side. You want to be on the lion's side. Is he safe? No. And that's what we try to think God's safe. God's a God of love. The New Testament God is a safe God. No, he's not safe. He's a holy and righteous God that we can't forget. And so we come to him with love. We come to him with boldness. But we also come to him with awesome and reverent fear. That he loves us. And I want to be right with him. I want to have that. I don't want to operate in the fear of like, God's going to thump me, God's going to thump me. No, I want to operate in the sense of God loves me and God's just. And if I'm messing around over here and I'm living in compromise, there are going to be consequences of my sin, and I'm not going to expect them. Because when we're compromising, we are blind. And that's the challenge with compromises. As soon as we compromise a little bit, we tell ourselves, we rationalize, right? And you've heard me say, rationalize are simply rational lies that we tell ourselves. And so the result is I'm believing a lie, and I'm getting disoriented to where God is. And so I begin to think he doesn't see me, or I begin to think that it's okay, or I begin to put God in the box here. And that's why we need one another. Because as soon as we get out of fellowship, we don't have that mirror. I don't have my brother to say, are you okay? You don't seem okay. You're like, you seem to be real agitated. I'm not agitated. Okay, I gotcha. No, but that's how we are. And that's why we need the body of Christ, so that we can come alongside to kind of challenge one another and to know one another. And if you're in a situation where you just kind of come to church and you just kind of walk out, don't want anybody to know me because I don't want it. I was at a conference today, and it was about inner healing, and we were just checking it out. It was really interesting. And it's going through this list of things where you're supposed to confess these sins, okay? And then you're supposed to say them out loud and confess them and find freedom and forgiveness, and all good stuff. Now, of course, we're in this group. There's about 20 or so people, and it comes to this part, and Lord, I confess to you. We're talking loud until it says the part that we're going to confess, because I don't want anybody to know that I might be just like them. Well, I don't think that they're like me. I think that I'm the only one that struggles with this. And I think that I'm alone and that I'm isolated, and that's the box that I put myself in. God's saying, no, 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 no. That person, we were so afraid to be real, open, and honest because I'm afraid that somebody's going to judge me and think that I'm less than I am. And out of that fear of judgment, then I don't tell the truth to anybody because, well, they might think that. And so the result is that other person is also struggling with maybe the same sin, and I'm struggling with this thing, and we live this isolated life like a pinball game, and we just kind of bounce off one another, and we never connect like God intended. What boxes are you putting God in? Where are you limiting God? Why are you limiting God? The worship team is going to come up. We're going to close, and we're going to take a few moments right now to pray. And I want you to take those questions. We'll leave these questions on here for a minute or two. I want you to pray through these questions because most of the time we don't realize when we're limiting God. Most of the time we don't realize when we're putting God in a box until we're slapped upside the head with it with the Word of God or with an experience. Or we go through a trial and all of a sudden, like the people of Israel, all of a sudden the box is gone, blown out, and I'm like, God, okay, I didn't see that coming. Now, it's painful to go that way. It's much easier to go to a brother and say, do I have any blind spots? That's a tough question. Pastor Dave posted on Facebook earlier this week, you want to get real with somebody, ask them, am I teachable? And then stop and listen. And then don't argue with them. Because that's usually what happens. I say, am I teachable? And they say, well, most of the time. Well, but I mean, that was just, and then all of a sudden we start arguing, and it's like, you're showing me exactly what I told you. You're not teachable. And then I'm going to ask somebody that knows. But most of us are too scared to ask. Most of us are too scared. We've got God nice and neat in the boxes. Everything fits. It's so nice. My Christianity is nice and neat, and I know and I understand everything. God is a God beyond comprehension. Take a moment now. Quietness of your heart. Search your heart and ask, God, am I putting you in a box anywhere in my life? Take that to the Lord now.